All right, today we are diving deep into the wonderfully weird world of optical illusions. We're going to figure out why your brain, this incredible machine, sometimes, well, lies to you. And we'll see how these fascinating glitches actually reveal the secrets of how we build reality itself. So, let's get into it. Okay, first up, take a really close look at this image. This is the famous Fraser spiral, and it's been messing with people's heads since 1908. You can feel your eyes just getting pulled in, right? Following what looks like a perfect endless spiral, circling in and in toward the center. It feels like you could trace it forever and never reach the end. I mean, it's a spiral. That's what you're seeing, that's what I'm seeing. It's a clear, obvious pattern. But what if I told you that what you're seeing isn't actually what's there at all? Just watch what happens when we trace one of those lines. See that? It's not a spiral, not even close. It's actually a series of perfect concentric circles just sitting one inside the other. The spiral you saw? It's a complete fabrication, an illusion created by your brain trying to make sense of that confusing, choppy background pattern. This is the perfect example of when seeing is absolutely not believing. So, how on earth is that possible? Well, in this explainer, we're going to break it all down. First, we'll get into the basics of why seeing isn't always believing. Then we're going to explore 3 big scientific theories that are all battling to explain perception. After that, we'll take a peek inside the brain with neuroscience. Then we'll switch gears and see how artists became masters of deception, and even how designers are using illusions for really powerful social cause. And finally, we'll wrap it all up by looking at what these brain-bending images really teach us about ourselves. You see, to survive in this chaotic world, your brain's #1 job is to build a model of your surroundings. It's constantly taking this fire hose of information from your senses and building a useful, simplified version of reality that you can actually act on. Optical illusions? Well, they're the fascinating byproducts of this whole process. They're like the little cracks that appear in the model, and they reveal the incredible guesswork and the assumptions your brain is making behind the scenes every single second of the day. And here's the thing to remember. These illusions aren't just random mistakes. They actually reveal fundamental truths about how our brains work. But why do they happen? Well, for decades, psychologists have been debating this, and it's led to 3 major schools of thought on how we perceive the world. Okay, let's break this down. First up, you've got Gestalt theory. The big idea here is that the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. Basically, our brains are hardwired to see patterns in complete pictures. So for them, illusions are like natural laboratories that show us the brain's built-in rules for organizing the world. Then there's cognitivism. These guys think perception is way more active. They say your brain is like a detective, making assumptions and drawing conclusions based on past experience. From their point of view, illusions are systematic errors. They happen when our brain applies a rule or an assumption in the wrong situation. And finally, you have the ecological approach. This theory says perception is much more direct. We just see the world in terms of what it affords us, what it allows us to do. They see illusions as rare mishaps that really only pop up in weird artificial lab settings, not so much in the real world. So while the psychologists were debating the big theories, neuroscientists started asking a slightly different question. What is physically happening inside our skulls? But, they immediately hit a classic snag, the huge difference between knowing where something happens and understanding why it happens. Think about it like this. A passenger in a car asks the driver, "Why are we going faster?" The driver says, "Because I pressed on the pedal." Now, is that answer correct? Yeah, technically. But is it very helpful? Not really. It tells you what happened, but it doesn't explain anything about the engine, the transmission, the wheels, the whole system working together to create speed. It's the exact same problem with the brain. Saying an illusion happens in the visual cortex is just like saying I pressed the pedal. It's a starting point, for sure, but it's not the full story of the how and the why. So just as a quick refresher on how this all works, light comes into your eye, hits the retina in the back, gets turned into electrical signals, and then zips down the optic nerve to your brain. It's in those visual centers of the brain that the real magic and, the mischief of illusions really begins. And this is where modern neuroscience circles right back to those psychological theories we talked about. Cognitive neuroscientists, for example, they love illusions. They use them to study the conversation happening inside your brain, how the raw data coming up from your eyes, what they call bottom-up information, clashes or combine with your brain's expectations and knowledge, which is top-down information. Gestalt neuroscientists use illusions to literally map out the functional architecture of the visual system. And even the ecological folks use illusions to study the difference between our two main visual pathways: vision for recognition, which helps us know what we're looking at, and vision for action, which tells us how to grab it or duck under it. Okay, so while scientists are using illusions to figure out the brain, artists have been using them for centuries to just plain mess with it. They are absolute masters at exploiting these little perceptual quirks, turning our brain's own shortcuts against us to create these mind-bending masterpieces. And when we talk about this, there is no greater master of the impossible than M.C. Escher. This guy wasn't a scientist, but his art is this stunning deep dive into geometric paradoxes. He'd take things like the Necker cube, that's that simple 2D drawing of a 3D cube that can flip its orientation, and he'd turn these simple tricks into these elaborate, impossible, yet somehow believable worlds. Just look at his 1960 piece, Ascending and Descending. This is directly inspired by an illusion called the Penrose Stairs. You've got two lines of monks, one group trudging up forever, the other walking down forever, on the same continuous, impossible loop. The place they start is also the place they end. Your brain looks at any single part of the staircase and goes, yep, that makes sense. But when it tries to put the whole thing together, it just breaks. It's a total paradox. And he did it again, just a year later with Waterfall. I mean, get this. The water here appears to flow uphill, turning a water wheel, and then somehow travels back to the top of the falls. It's a self-contained, perpetual motion machine. This is another one of his impossible structures that just loops back on itself, completely tricking our perception of space and gravity. But it's not just Escher. The principles behind these illusions are used everywhere. On the left, you can see art and even fashion that's inspired by the herring illusion. That's where perfectly straight lines look like they're bending when you put them over a radiating pattern. And on the right, you've got these clever graphic designs that use negative space, the empty area around an object, to create a totally separate, hidden image. It plays with your brain's decision about what's the subject and what's the background.
So we've seen illusions in science, we've seen them in art, but what about using them for social impact? Well, here is a really powerful and, honestly, unexpected application. Using the disorienting nature of illusions to build awareness and empathy for people with autism spectrum disorder. So first, what is autism spectrum disorder, or ASD? Well, it's a neurodevelopmental disorder where the brain just develops and processes information differently. This can lead to challenges in social interaction and communication. And for many people on the spectrum, a really key aspect is sensory overload. Their senses can get way too much information from the environment, which can make the world feel overwhelming, confusing, and even chaotic. And the design project we're about to look at tries to capture that feeling visually. The designer's thought process here was just brilliant. They started with the core concept, the brain. Then they chose a metaphor to represent that feeling of sensory overload, a maze. And finally, they picked an optical illusion to give the whole thing form, the impossible, ambiguous structure of the Necker cube. And this is the final design. It's a shape that looks like a brain, is structured like a maze, and is built using the bizarre logic of an impossible cube. The whole point is to visually express the complexity and confusion of the outside world as it might be perceived by someone with ASD, a world that can feel like a puzzle that's impossible to solve. Here's another amazing design from that same project. This one uses the Fraser spiral, the one we started with. Remember how the illusion only works if the pattern is just right? Well, if you break the spiral, the illusion vanishes. This graphic uses that idea as a powerful metaphor. It shows people working together to repair the structure, symbolizing community support. And it's an appeal for donations to help provide better conditions for people on the autism spectrum. So, from a simple spiral that wasn't a spiral to deep neuroscience, from impossible art to designing for empathy, we've seen just how deeply these illusions are woven into our experience. I think it's time we tie it all together and ask, what do they really teach us? So what's the big takeaway from all of this? Optical illusions are not a sign that your brain is broken or that it's making a mistake. They are windows into the mind. They pull back the curtain and show us the incredible, non-stop work your brain is doing every single moment, predicting, guessing, and actively constructing the world you experience. Your reality isn't just a photograph of the world. It's a masterpiece painted in real time by your brain. And that leaves us with one final, pretty mind-bending question to chew on. At the end of the day, we have these two things, reality and illusion. But if your brain is the ultimate architect of everything you see, feel, and believe, what is the true difference between them anyway? Thanks for joining me.